I can do calamari flan, but I can only pay half.
What are the economic lessons we can learn from Star Wars? This video is part of a series where I have conversations with Noam Ebner, a professor of negotiations and conflict resolution at Creighton University, and we examine a Star Wars clip, then discuss the economics, game theory, bargaining, and negotiation lessons behind them. Let's go to the clip.
Oh, that was fast. Did you catch them all? Good, I'll begin the offload. Udoba Nuchak.
These are Imperial credits.
They still spin.
I don't know if you heard, but the Empire is gone.
It's all I've got. Save the theatrics. Fine, I can do calamari flan, but I can only pay half.
Fine.
So, short little 1 minute clip. So Mando meets with Greef Karga, and clearly Mando already did the work here. And the issue we see, Mando did all of the work, and then Greef goes ahead and says, well, I'm only going to pay you half of what I was going to pay. An example of the holdup problem. So I don't know how often in conflicts that you run into this issue, but you run into this quite a bit. So what are your thoughts when you see this particular clip, Noam?
Well, of course, I mean, the notion of renegotiating the deal, whether in good or bad faith, post facto, is common in negotiation scenarios and is therefore common as a source of conflict. And of course, watching this clip, I mean, think about it. Mando has put himself in harm's way to bring in several bounties. He's invested a lot. His sunk costs in this are great. Fuel costs are up, as he comments later. And he comes and essentially Greef Karga is offering him half. I'm surprised based on what we've seen Mando so far in episode 1 of the series. The thing that surprised me most is that he didn't draw his gun or shoot out a flamethrower. So here was an opportunity to respond to aggression or competition with escalated competition.
Sure.
And he didn't.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. So there's a single buyer here. So
right.
Mando does all the work, and now that the work is done, Mando's kind of stuck taking whatever offer. The things that I think about from a game theory point of view on this is, one, is this a repeated game with this player? If it's a repeated game, of course, if you, for lack of a better phrasing, if you're going to screw your opponent out of what they, renege on the contract, that's going to impact their willingness to work with you in the future. If it's a repeated game, you're less likely to see this happen.
Right.
And so could this be an optimal move, not looking at morals or ethics, but sheer for Greef Karga to do, perhaps if it's not a repeated game?
But, and here's the but.
Yeah.
It is a repeated game, right? Greef Karga is the head of the Bounty Hunters Guild, and Mando is his best bounty hunter. So what's the deal here?
Yeah, it does seem like a kind of a silly move. And on top of it, as you say, right, there's a threat of violence here. Mando's obviously willing to use violence when necessary. I don't follow why he would want to make this particular move with Mando. There's another game in game theory that is kind of fun to do that economists studied in more or less the laboratory, called a trust game, where there's a bunch of versions you could do. But for example, you could go to one player and say, you could either have $5 or you can give $50 to the other player. We will either give you, or so if it's pretend two people are talking to, or somebody's talking to me and you're the other player in the game, they could say, Matt, here's the two options. We either give you $5 or we're going to give Gnome $50 and Gnome gets to decide how to split it. You get no say in how he splits it, but he will know you chose to give the $50 and that he would have had 0 if you just took the 5, but he's got the 50.
Right.
It's called the trust game. In theory, you know, if you do purely selfish motives, if you do what's called backward induction, the player should just take the $5.
Yeah.
Because if they give the 50, the other player should just keep all 50. Now, there's more than monetary payouts here, and there's, you know, sometimes people just think, well, they'll do what they think is right. Other times, you know, you don't want to do something and then somebody dislikes you. There's a monetary cost for that. So, but if it's pure cold calculations,
take the money.
Equilibriums keep the 5. And so this reminds me somewhat of this, which makes me say, why did Mando take the job in the first place if there was a chance on this happening?
Well, again, then you go back to the question of like, how open is the market? Like, you know, there's one buyer, and that's it. Maybe there are no buyers. Later, they allude to the fact that there are bounty hunters who are, you know, operating on their own outside the guild. The people hiring bounty hunters because they don't want to pay guild prices. So this could all be more open than we would think at first. But you know, this is an iterated game. From their perspective, they have a relationship. So whether you look at this from one sort of a dilemma or another, whether you look at it from the trust game, this isn't happening in a vacuum.
Correct.
And there will be future iterations, and there will be and there is a relationship that exists, which makes me wonder, sort of based on how you say, like, why did Mando take it in the first place, and are there future interactions, that maybe this interaction in its own self is something that has played out before and will play out again. In other words, maybe Mando knows that this is Greef Karga's way of doing business. Maybe he knew that when he accepted. I mean, that's sort of from inside the plot, sort of trying to figure it out and less an external analysis. But if he did have that information, then that would, of course, affect his decision within the game.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. If Mando had that type of information, knowing, okay, he's offering me whatever. I mean, let's convert it to dollars. Let's say he's offering me $1 million. Mm-hmm. Knowing him, I'm really only going to get $500,000, but that's okay. I'm okay doing it for $500,000.
Right.
Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense. And thinking through, like, because you would think this game is repeated and there's some reputational impact. I mean, there's a chance Mando just takes it because there's no other option. But if the game is going to be repeated over time, understanding that this could have happened and still thinking, yeah, it's definitely well worth my time for half of the initial stated payout makes sense.
So let me toss something in now from a negotiation perspective.
Please.
So if you watch the episode 1 until now, and then you suddenly see this scene, as I did the first time I watched The Mandalorian, something struck me, and that is that up until now, Mando has interacted with the ruffians in the cantina that the scene opened up in. He interacted with the first bounty, the Mithral, with the bartender. And then he met Greef Karga. And what struck me was that in all of those other interactions, if you remember, Mando hardly said a word. In fact, he did not say a word except to the Mithral. And all of these people tried to engage him in conversation, particularly the Mithral, who tried to negotiate with him. And Mando didn't negotiate with any of them. Rather, he took what he wanted. So I formed this vision. I said, hey, Mando's, he doesn't negotiate. He takes what he wants, and he takes it, he generally speaking, by force. And then all of a sudden, with Greef Karga, he negotiates, but he essentially capitulates. He essentially says, okay, fine. He got, it's like he got a better exchange rate, right? Or he got it in a different currency, but he did not get more money, and even more, even after he didn't respond. Here, I'll give you half. He didn't say, well, give me 60%. I mean, he didn't try to bargain.
No.
And so what I started thinking about this is that is that Grief Karga was right when he said to Mando, spare the theatrics. In other words, that all of this was more ritual between them than an actual interaction in which they're really trying to compete with each other and come out with the best of the deal. And whether it's the ritual is on both of their sides or it was only on Mando's side, Mando doesn't negotiate. When he's out in the field, he has a hunter's morals, and when it's Grief Karga, he respects the hierarchy. Perhaps.
Yeah, that's that. No, I think that's interesting. That's a really good point, and kind of deeper way of thinking through this short scene. But what I love about these is, right, that was an under a minute scene.
Right.
As an educator, I love how you can unpack so much from a
Right.
1 minute scene in so many ways.